Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the Douglas County Budget Commission. I did it again. Douglas County Commission budget deliberations. I'll just say that Douglas County, but okay, I see. Yeah, never mind. Yesterday we discussed all of the county departments. We talked about VOCA and VAWA funds, and we started to dig into community partners. We talked about historic resources, Douglas County Extension, and Cottonwood, I think we talked about and got that one. Today, I thought maybe we could start with mental health. I don't know if that sounds like a good starting spot for commissioners. That seems, oops. We have some technical issues. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hey, Robin. Oh,
Yes,
can you give Cammie screen sharing?
yes. Sorry. There we go.
So our mental health sales tax items are on the last page. And there's a lot of green on here. I don't quite know what that means for everybody, but
So for me, it was, I had corresponding green notes that said mental health sales tax, just because I didn't reformulate any of the cells. But the total, I did total up all of those 1, 2, 3, 4, those 6 things that I highlighted in green in my column, that's on the mental health sales tax line. And as far as I remember, yeah, supported the full amounts of all the things that I highlighted. There's just not numbers there. Thanks for confirming, Cammie.
And I had flagged some things for notes and some things for discussion. So those are my boxes in green.
so maybe start with Artists Helping the Homeless, since it looks like there's some agreement here on debt elimination, but it looks like Commissioner Willie would like to pay more in debt. Walk me through that.
No, so I was combining several categories for discussion and not wanting to just leave it blank and wanting to have a starting point for discussion. I'm uncomfortable with being asked for a 100% capital cost to cover that for the new house and also for the loan repayments on the 2. I just think we need a larger discussion about. I highly value Artists Helping the Homeless, and I recognize that we may want to go outside of our comfort zone to get projects on the ground sooner, just given the climate that we have for support needs for supportive housing. So I flagged that for discussion. But overall, there are a lot of funding. There are a lot of funders that like to give to capital projects like this. I think there's some diversification that would be reasonable to ask for in the funds that are from these funds. And we don't have any of that. We don't have any other braided funding, any other funding sources recommended or suggested for this yet. And that's the part that makes me uncomfortable. And the other piece is paying off debt if it's a reasonable, I mean, we found that those were 4.5% and 5% loans, I believe. Likely to balloon, but not this year. One was in September of 2026 and one was in September of 2027. So I'll just open the discussion and see where people are, what other people are thinking.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would like to see more diversification of funding for Artists Helping the Homeless. I think we're at over 70% of their total overall budget. I think when we first started with Artists Helping the Homeless, and I think they have done their data shows truly positive impacts on our community, and I'm really pleased with that. But when we started with Artists Helping the Homeless, they actually came from out of county. We had asked other social agencies in town if they would do this, and we couldn't find anybody, and that's why we brought them in. And so it was completely understandable at the time we brought them in for us to be their major funder. Since then, there's been a few years, and I'm not expecting a huge impact, but it does seem to me like it is all on Douglas County, and I'd like to see a little more diversification. Sarah, you have something to say there?
I just want to clarify that we are their major funder for their Douglas County operations. They have other funders for their other communities.
And I guess I'd like to see that same, if that's true in other communities, I'd like to see that here or see it in their budget analysis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know that their funding is that diverse in Kansas City.
Mhm.
It's,
Okay. A question sort of sideways of that a little bit is if we pay off these capital projects, who owns it? And what's the next step with that? It seems like Douglas County might own those homes or something. I mean, I don't know. That was just a question I had of who owns those buildings.
but we certainly could, similar to how the conversations we had during ARPA, we could put deed restrictions on the property that would either retain it for public good or revert back to Douglas County if Artists Helping the Homeless no longer provided operations. I think that's something we could explore with attorneys.
So that was, I was okay paying off the debt because it looked like they needed dollars for expenses. But I'd rather do it one time with these monies than over and over and over again. So that was part of my decision making.
And I had penciled in the 500,000 across those three requests, which was the new house and paying off the first two, with the idea that sometimes seed money helps generate additional funding from other sources, and recognizing that we have an obligation to this work that we asked them to come here for, and that we have a great need for the work too, and we've had a lot of successes there. The question is, how much more time would it take the organization to generate the rest of that capital, the rest of those capital funds if it doesn't come from here? And are we willing to wait longer for the result? So that was kind of the main discussion that I wanted to have is, and I also very much in favor of looking into some possible deed restrictions for who owns that property if Douglas County invests in it.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation about deed restrictions. I wasn't I guess that's an ownership question in part, but had the thought, like Sarah's comments conveyed, that along with the properties that we heavily invested in for ARPA, wanting to ensure that those remain permanently affordable. That said, I don't know what the total cost of those houses are, how much has already been paid on it. I don't know what share this debt is of that. So I think, but in terms of what can we do to ensure that these properties remain permanently affordable housing is an important value to me. I'm open to a smaller amount that's still most of the amount, like Commissioner Willie. Well, let me clarify, Commissioner Willie, 500,000 for the two capital payoff amounts. Is that what you were, or across all three things? Because it looks like now you've got 400,000.
So the 400,000 was intended to be that operational request to initiate the new program. Even that is at 100% level. That's another discussion to be had. But that was kind of what I was indicating with the numbers here, is that the 500,000 was portions of paying off two mortgages and seed money for a capital campaign for the third. Those numbers don't work out to cover two of them, plus have some, I think it would be a discussion with the nonprofit to figure out how much of that do they need to be seed money for future requests from other funders. How much do they want to pay off maybe one of those? What that, I just had some flexibility there. Just wanted to talk more about it.
On the new house, I didn't fund the new house because I think it needs a little more thinking on it. You know, we don't have a property identified. I think this is all, you know, $400,000 a year is a significant commitment of funding to run another house. I know that they've had some conversations with DECA and what that housing is. That's a different type of housing, of supportive housing, but I know that they're looking at expanding their female housing as well. So I just wanted more time on that one. That's a big number, 900,000 and 400,000 ongoing. And I just wanted us to talk about that a little more. In some of these, we have sort of started and then continued to visit about it until we felt more comfortable with it.
I did have a note in my column for this one that I think I would be more comfortable with this set aside because I'm supportive of the idea. I think it feels a need, and if there's an opportunity before this time next year, you know, with the the realities of a real estate market, I would like to be able to support and heavily invest in that because I think that their outcomes and services have been really strong, and to replicate that model for women in our community feels like an important value, but setting it aside and waiting for the project to be a little more fully developed feels more comfortable to me. But that said, I was supportive of setting aside the full amount, open to less than that, but would like to earmark some dollars for that.
What about if the county were to approach paying off the mortgage on one of the existing homes with a deed restriction that kind of clarifies some ownership there, and allowing Artists Helping the Homeless to then mortgage the home that they're looking to buy. So that would give them the ability, presumably they would have the capacity then to get a mortgage on the new home. And then by that time, we would have some solid numbers, a price on the house. That would help us maybe quickly let them move into the next home without us being on the line for everything.
I think the bigger challenge is the operating.
That's what I'm concerned about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, I mean, because we have that behavioral sales tax money and that's sort of built up over time. I don't have a terrible problem with the one-time cost. That's why I fully funded those two houses. It's that 400,000 operating that I want to put that in the larger picture of all the things that we're doing.
And I think that's, you know, we have significant needs for supportive housing, as the commissioners have heard. I'm not, this is not cheap work. And I am because there are some restrictions on Medicaid in this state in terms of paying for these types of services. You know, we haven't found a ton of sources for paying for operations for supportive housing.
If $400,000 is the anticipated annual cost, which is probably not truly known since that program for women has not been started up yet, chances are that that entire amount wouldn't be needed in 2024 if that property has not yet been identified and nobody's been hired, and there's a lag with that. So I don't know that, even though I did pencil in that 400,000 as the operating funds, I don't know that that entire amount would be required in 2024.
I guess you just made my case for, I think this needs a little more time to ferment, you know, and for us to understand it. Because I agree, we didn't, the question was asked by one of you, I can't remember which, you know, have we identified a property? And we haven't yet. So I think we still have a ways to go on this. I agree with Sarah, the need is high. But I just want to make sure we're thinking ahead. Sarah, we've talked a little bit about needs for health sales tax going forward. I mean, when we look at how much comes in, do we have a picture of there's a lot of things that are ongoing support here out of sales tax. Do we have a comfort level that all these things can be maintained and still within that sales tax?
Well, I don't like absolutes. I feel comfortable with where we are to now, and our incoming ongoing revenue exceeds our expense currently. Some of that, the factors I can't control for are what happens at the state level with KDADs. The real success here is that the state has stepped up to provide more funding for the TRC than originally anticipated. If that were to change, which I don't necessarily anticipate for the next 3 years or 2 years, but after that, it's hard to say. I think we will be able to sustain the TRC with the funds we have available and have room to support supportive housing. And what I don't know is that enough to support all supportive housing needs in our community? And a comparison of, not all supportive housing is exactly the same and equal. We know we have needs throughout the system. The question is, that part I'm a little less comfortable with, but I think from a staff perspective, we were thinking that the vast majority of the remainder of the excess capacity in that fund would go towards supportive housing for the most part. I mean, maybe a few things here or there in terms of crisis response.
And I agree that a good portion of that will be needed for supportive housing. And I think some of that will also end up with Artists Helping the Homeless. I'm also don't want that ever to look like an open door that we will just fund anything that is asked for. I like having as much information as possible for making decisions. And I think that's been a theme that we've talked about with all of our partners. And so I guess my question is, what is the mechanism for kind of, flagging our level of interest and yet, earmarking that for once we have more information, making a final decision? Can that just stay at this stage and the mental health sales tax fund is available? Do we need to make some decisions dollar wise at this point in order to move on with budget?
I don't think you do. I think we can plan to have a work session this fall, but I guess I want clarity of particularly just on Artists Helping the Homeless to talk about if you want one specifically, just to bring them in to talk about financing, make sure he's got his financial person there, talking about the projects and what they're thinking about. I just would want a little more direction from the commissioners as we approach that work session as to what you specifically want him to talk about. And then Jill is happy to sort of continue to have conversations with the commission about supportive housing and what those needs are as well. So I don't think you really have to do anything today with this. You don't have to earmark it because it is in the behavioral health sales tax fund. Those reserves will just stay in those reserves. We would do the transfer as planned. And we would be building to, unless you allocated the operating dollars between now and 2024, which you'd have the capacity to do, it would just fall to fund balance in that fund. I wouldn't recommend you lowering the capacity in that fund. Does that make sense? Okay. So I don't know that you have to do really anything.
And yet I don't want to slow the work down. I don't know what stage quite they're at, but I think maybe just some dialogue about what we're interested in seeing moving forward. And I haven't been entirely comfortable with paying off the homes just because I don't have that full picture of how that debt is working for them and against them. But I would kind of throw that out as one possibility that helps move the project forward would be to pay off one of those and then know that they would then have the capacity then to mortgage a new home and begin that process. But I'm not tied to it.
I personally would prefer to move forward with moving. I mean, I think that the one-time capital costs are pretty comfortable for me. the amounts that they're at, and if it frees up money in their operations to boost and cover expenses and job market increase, I think that there's value in that, and I'm comfortable with just, not allocating anything for that, the acquire and operating new house, because lots more information to be determined, but I would advocate for saying yes to the full request for those payoff amounts.
So far, their budget hasn't suggested any decrease in requests from us for operating funds along with these requests. So that's another conversation I'd like to have, that if you're no longer servicing debt with the money that we give you, perhaps you need less of it.
Well, and I think that's. So we've been fairly consistent, I think, in saying that we're not interested in funding job market increases for community partners. And so this was one way I could make the argument that we weren't, and then they have to make that decision on whether they want to use those dollars. So by paying that off, right, that frees up their debt payment. Now, if they put another debt payment on another property, that, I think this is one of those cases where we fund so much of this organization, it feels like it's Douglas County, and maybe we should just be making some of these decisions. Their staff should flow into it. I know that is a different way of doing business, but at some point, some of these community partners, as I said before, seem more like Douglas County agencies than community partners. So,
And in
I-
some ways,
yeah.
and I know I'm walking a line here, so just tell me to be quiet and sit back. If there was an example of a community partner that I felt like was really aligned with the strategic direction of where we're headed, it's Artists Helping the Homeless. We have a seat on their board. We have another staff person directly involved in their, working with their operations, and they have a very close working relationship with Douglas County Reentry. So I feel like they're very closely aligned with, if we tell them we want to do something, they say, great, how can we help? Other than us being them and us operating it ourselves, I don't know how we could be any more closely aligned with a community partner than Artists Helping the Homeless.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring one thing up that I know some of you have awareness of, that, when we think about is it our program or their program? We have received a notice that the county will be awarded a little over $300,000 from HUD to provide permanent supportive housing. Nobody else applied in the community for it, so we submitted an application. We got it. We've got to develop some semblance of a program. So that's my way of saying, I don't think any of us ever intended to be developing our own program, but it's a little bit of that's what's happening, because we have had so many challenges with other partners, and how we tiptoe into doing that and leverage and not leave any county funds on the table. That's going to be a developing piece of work that obviously will happen in really close consultation with Sarah and the commission. And my intent was, as soon as I get that official notice from HUD, you'll be hearing about it officially, but it's happening. And if we're going to leave federal dollars on the table, unless we figure something out. So I just want to make sure I brought that up.
I think the supportive housing one is a topic that's going to really push our comfort zone. And I think we will need every partner who's willing to be in that space. So short of us being the provider for those services, I think there will be some deeper investment in some of these partners than, at least initially. And perhaps that's not a long-term, but I think I expect to put more into Artists Helping the Homeless than I would feel comfortable with if this were a project that had more maturity to it and or longer, that we'd had more history with. I don't know that I made a lot of sense there.
Okay, so I hear two commissioners who are ready to pay off the entire debt that they have. Is that right, Commissioner Reed? Did I hear that?
I am.
What, oh, is that, are you also then
Yeah, so.
the two houses?
mhm.
And no, just nothing allocated for the $900,000 request.
That I'm willing to have a conversation. I mean, it seems like there may be two that are more there than I am. And so I recognize I could be, yeah. Do we have a dollar number on that?
Well, I think for me, what shifted in the conversation we just had is that maybe there's not really a need to set aside in this instance because the money is there in the mental health sales tax and is a fund that's available. So if a later work session and then, tangible opportunity presents itself later in the year. Sarah, do you have a reaction to that? I guess it feels like maybe we don't need to do a set aside and we can just acknowledge that idea needs more baking.
I certainly don't think you need to do a set aside. What I would say is this is a little bit of chicken and egg. Like, I don't know how hard they're going to push to look for a property if they don't know it's something we're interested in. Because this is a program they do for us, because we are the main funder for the operations. They cannot afford it without us. So they will not look to do the program without us. We can have a work session and talk to them and express more interest and say, and talk about the challenges and signal that if you want. I'm only comfortable with these kind of conversations outside of budget in the behavioral. I want to be very clear, in the behavioral health sales tax fund alone. And I don't want to make it open season on that fund year round. So that's the part that makes me a little nervous about waiting, but I certainly think we can get more information before we jump into a new female house, if that's what the commission would prefer.
I definitely want to see that program happen in Douglas County, and I definitely want to support the work that they're currently doing. So I would follow the lead of other two commissioners and put aside the funding to pay off those two homes and maybe have a very short turnaround on a larger conversation about the new house.
I think we're good. Okay. Did you get all that, Cami? Okay. So then the next one we have is Bert Nash. We have a number of requests and we had a number of requests from Bert Nash to reallocate funds. And then these are the supplement, I guess they're supplemental, but they're all in the mental health sales tax request.
I would tackle the capital request first, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So this proposal, of which we were asked for 2 million out of, I'd have to pull up the sheet, was 7.6. I can't remember what the full number was. What I would say is that proposal was exactly what I was looking for in terms of a capital request. Here's how much we need. Here's the total cost. Here's where the other funds are expected to come from. That's the role model for what I would like to see capital requests come in. So I had put the 2 million in as requested for supportive housing project.
Yeah, that's the only one of Bert Nash's requests that I supported wholeheartedly and at the full amount also. And I'm excited to see where that plan is at because this commission has watched it evolve a few times. The community has seen some starts and stops to it, and I'm excited about where it's headed and definitely want to make an investment in that.
Yeah, my only hesitation on full funding, and I can be convinced pretty easily, was just wanting to make sure we had commitments from all the partners. There's some money from Affordable Housing Advisory Board. There's some money from the city. They're asking for the money, and there's still a gap there. And I just wanted to know how they were going to fill that gap. Maybe it was in the report and I missed it, but I thought about giving $1 million now and holding and saying, yeah, that's our support. But as we continue to develop it almost as a match to come back with and continue to work on that. But like I said, I can be convinced pretty easily on this one. I was interested to see where other commissioners were.
Total costs were 13,665,000.
I don't know where the other total costs are coming from. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, I had a similar question. That said, I mean, to Commissioner Willie's point, like the amount of detail that we got about it and sort of tangible information about how it's progressing gives me a lot of confidence. And well, think that it's going to meet a significant need, like it's a significant number of units. And for me, I mean, the supportive housing projects were of the highest priority. So I'm still pretty inclined to fully funding it. I think there are some questions about what are all the costs and where is that gap going to be made up? But it seems like they've made some pretty significant progress and have some momentum. So I'd like to contribute to that momentum and keep the ball rolling.
I'm fine that let's move it over. I also want to say I really like the location they've chosen. I think that's a good spot for it.
I see both of you are supportive of the transitions program support. I had that in there at one point. Took it out kind of as a final cut, but I'm easily supportive of that again because it's specific to supportive housing and it is a program that we've been a part of since the beginning.
Okay, so those two.
I guess the only reason I'd flagged that for a kind of conversation was, I'm not sure how much we've supported of transitions, where that additional request is coming from. So that I did have some questions on. Again, transitions is a program that I highly value for our community. I just didn't have enough background on kind of the history of our funding of that and where the request comes from.
Well, we built it. So we pay the debt on it. And the 2024 program, it's a $1.3 million direct program cost. We provided 220. And then with the health insurance reallocation, we added almost 400,000. So that would be 389 plus 220. You do math in your head better than we can. What do you want to do?
119.
So we're currently about half of it as it stands. They do get funding from some other grants. And FFS, which I always forget what that is in their lingo. It is an allowable expense. It gets a little bit of money from CCBHC. So if we funded this at 165, I think, they're still gonna have a gap, but.
Yeah,
So you want me?
My thinking on this was, this is one of our first supportive housing projects. It's one we've been involved with from the beginning. I think we knew when we opened up these facilities that we had to figure out how it was going to be funded and that we may not have the perfect number to start with. And this seemed reasonable. It's, as we've talked about, it's in our supportive housing wheelhouse. So this was really something that I felt.
I actually did that completely wrong.
Oh,
Our funding is, I need my ruler. My eyes are not as good as they used to be. Our funding was 180 and then we're moving 300,000. So we're 480. We're 480,000 of their $1.3 million program costs. And that's before this request. So. Yeah. So we're going to put this in. We have consensus.
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. It looks like you had consensus on social detox. Or you want to?
Let's finish up Bert
Oh,
and
yeah,
Matt
sorry.
if we can first. Commissioner Willie, you had a couple of items marked for discussion.
Oh, the JDC therapist, I did want to talk through that's the one for our program.
Oh.
So if we do not have that, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do for JDC.
Yeah, and we didn't get a chance to really ask about that either for Bert Nash or from the Criminal Justice Services. So if you can give us some more information, that'd be super.
Yeah, I can see what we can find out from the status from Pam. And we'll just ask her a follow-up question. I do know that this is the cost of a full therapist and it was her thought that they only needed somebody part-time. But I'll see what we can get.
And I guess I was under the perception that there was someone part-time and then this was to go to full-time. Is that not the case?
I didn't, that's not my recollection, but
So we haven't had anyone at all?
there's been a gap since there was a change with the RAP funding. So the school district used to pay for this position and then the school district no longer supports the position
When did that go away?
about
2 years
2
ago.
years ago. So they have gone without for the last 2 years.
Do we want to get more information about that? Because I was like the only one that penciled that one in.
I'd be happy to get more information and sort of walk through it.
I also flagged the RAP program because I wanted to talk a little bit more about why some school districts help pay for that program and others don't, and how equitable is that? And I just think we need to put in front of every organization that offers programs through Douglas County Schools that we have 8 school districts and not 4, certainly not 1, and make sure that there is a method in place or discussion in place for how those services are also extended to other Douglas County youth that live outside of our main 4 school districts. That doesn't necessarily mean that we put a full-time staff person in another county because we have 24 students in that school district. But I need that discussion from our partners about how they are planning to do that. I have asked for the information. I haven't gotten any back yet about kind of a bigger funding picture, a clearer funding picture for RAPS overall. So we can see, what services are being provided where, what communities are being asked to step up for that when USD 497 is not.
Can you forward that to us so that we can track it, make sure it gets to all the commissioners?
I do not yet have any information back, but
Okay.
yeah, if I get
But
anything, I'll be glad.
If
to
you have
get
the email asked, that way we can just help track it for you.
Okay.
My reason for not funding this is I think, when the city cut their funding and the school district reduced their funding, Bert Nash and USD 497 said we can make it work. And now we're at a gap and we've used some of our that space for what we used to pay for insurance to help support it. So it's not like we're not helping, but I struggle with other governmental agencies just saying, I'm not going to fund this anymore. Let's have the county do it. I think I appreciate what you're saying, Commissioner Willie, and hopefully they'll step up and fund it. But sometimes I think we need things to get a little lean before we actually decide like it was of value. I don't agree with the city's choice or the school district's choice not to fund this. I think it's really important, but I think if the county steps in every time and sort of takes on that role, I just have some concerns. I like good collaboration.
That's exactly how I feel about it. I just to completely backfill the gap left by other government agencies doesn't sit right with me. So I think we have done a lot to fill the gap and make sure that the program sustains at some level. It's a hard one to say no to because there's no reason not to support RAP, but the way that we came to this request is problematic for me, and so I'm not supportive of it. Commissioner Willie, I do appreciate you raising questions though about the about Douglas County youth in all school districts, and so I think that that we can be a part of prompting some of those questions and discussions to hear more about it and look at how those resources are spread across all of the school districts currently, and what those investments, where the other gaps in investments are from other municipalities also. So
I think we've got two questions. One is more easily resolved than the other possibly. One is how do we understand who's paying and what they're getting for it, including like some of the other school districts. And the other question is, what's the county's role in funding this program? And if so, it needs to be equally funded for every school district, every youth in Douglas County. I'm probably not ready to, I wasn't really ready to put in the full amount until I had that discussion. I penciled in an amount there of 100,000 with the idea that I wanted to have the discussion and that I highly value having mental health services in our schools. So
I want to be clear on what the questions are, because the first question I think we can get answers to, which is an overview of RAP services and who currently finances them. The county's role is up to you.
that's up to us.
It's not
Yeah.
up to Bert Nash. So I don't know what information I can provide on that.
I think having that first piece is important to me.
Okay.
Because either the other school districts need to step up or the school districts need to not be asked to step up equally.
And I will say, if we're going to hold the city of Lawrence responsible for funding, the cities of Baldwin and Eudora also need to be in that engagement as well. And so I think, if this is a complete, we just got to decide how we want to approach this and what level of services our community expects here. And when I say our communities, that includes our municipalities. So,
And as someone who kind of sat through some conversations when we worked on the RAP MOU with all of the school districts a couple years back, what I'd say here is that I think Baldwin and Eudora were in a different, Imperial Compton were in a different position when the sales tax was expanded. They didn't really have hardly any behavioral health services in their schools at all. Whereas Lawrence had already funded social workers on their own dime. So USD 497 pays for social workers in their schools and counselors. And then RAP was an extension for other programs. So the partnership in USD 497 between what their staff were and RAP was different than what you didn't have any of that in Baldwin and Eudora. So when my understanding is then when they say they match some of those funds, it means those are dollars that like USD 497 is putting towards its social workers that these folks said, well, Bert Nash, we're a small team. We can't really employ two people. Why don't you do it? If that was clarified, would that help sort of paint the picture of everybody's investing? It just looks a little different in each district.
That would be very helpful.
Okay, I'll see if we can get something on that.
yeah, and I can see a system that says this is base funding from the county that covers everyone for this level of service. This is how we do all of the services in the county. If the city wants to step up and provide an enhanced service on that, they can put dollars to it. If the school district wants to provide enhanced services to that, they can put dollars to it. But we've got to decide as a county working with Bert Nash what the base level of services is, and then give options to school districts and cities to enhance those services or not. So I think that's where I get to this. That's maybe a better way of saying, and not a defensive position, like I'm not happy you cut it. We need to decide what our base level of service is.
Is that information that we can get back and still have within this time frame?
I don't think so.
I don't want to leave RAP unfunded.
But let's be
Into this
clear, it is
process.
not unfunded.
Okay.
It currently
the-
receives $650,000 and it's going to get another 210 from the sales tax from the health insurance. So it's sitting at 860 of so we already pay for over half of RAP. The rest, they do get some funding from CCBHC and some other grants. So there is still a gap, but please remember, part of that gap, we also pay for on the sliding fee scale. So the county pays 650,000 towards the sliding fee scale, and we're going to put another 210 towards it. So it's not unfunded.
Yeah. It feels like a hard thing to say because it's not commentary on the value that I have for the RAP program. But I am not comfortable with us filling that gap. And I don't believe that it leaves it unfunded. Is it a leaner budget than they would like? Might it have some impact on services? Perhaps, most likely. But is it on us to completely fulfill that responsibility? And I mean, I think that we can lean into our role as conveners in some way in trying to really organize some of those questions, both amongst ourselves and then at large with other municipalities and school districts, for sustainable funding and what that delineation looks like. But I don't think that funding their gap this year, or even setting aside money for it, really gets us there or equates much progress in that conversation. It feels like we will just be asked when there's another gap in funding.
Okay, so here's where I think we are at as a commission. We're going to wait on the JDC therapist for more information. We're not going to fund the additional RAP support. And then the other two, no one funded. And then the transitions we're going to fund, and we're going to go 2 million on the supportive housing. Stop me now if we think we're wrong there. Okay. All right, so let's move to DECA, and I see that 2 commissioners had it there, and Commissioner Reed, you had the ominous green box.
Yeah, those were both things that I fully supported. Well, actually, I'm sorry. I think that the behavioral health summit, I had a note that maybe is set aside for that one. That one I was a little on the fence about, but I think that with the growth in programming and services, that there could be some value to that. And if DECA is who's hosted it in previous years and sort of has a blueprint and capacity for that, then I'm supportive. But you know, the main thing that I support is definitely the full social detox.
Yeah, and I also had that, I felt like when we had the conversation with DECA just last month or so about the 2023 funding for it, that was part of the conversation that we were having for 2024. Also, I would like to get really great data back after after a full year's worth of programming. So by budget time next year, I think we should have something to show for ourselves and really have a better understanding what that program is doing. But I had the full amount in.
If both commissioners are supportive of behavioral health summit, that's fine. I just want to make a comment about the school-based prevention programming. I really like this idea. I think it could really help. There is a need out there for it. It just needs a little more time. I just want to hear a little bit more of partnership with the school districts on what that looks like, how that would be implemented into the curriculum, instructional practice, all those kind of things. And this just needs a little more time. I think they're willing to put in the time, but that's where I was on that one. So I hear 309,810 for the social detox extension, and then 25,000 for the behavioral health summit. Is that it? Okay.
And I'd echo your comments about the school-based prevention program. I think what we heard, and I know very little about it and the distinctions, but that there's some real, what's the word that I want? Potential synergy between RAP and an expansion of programming like this. But yeah, a little bit more massaging of it, and hopefully maybe a clearer understanding of how that how the two work together and support each other's roles. But I don't have enough information right now to be supportive of it. I don't know if that means we want to do, well, I guess nobody marked it. Sorry, I was looking at a different line and thought Commissioner Willie had included it. So,
Well, Commissioner Reed, I mean, there is a bit of a theme here that's evolving for me is we have money in this fund. And so we're getting lots of requests that are maybe needing a little more time of work. And so I think we all have a real value around addressing mental health in our schools and in our community and supportive housing. But I also think we have a responsibility with those tax dollars to make sure the project is fully developed before we just start handing out money on that. And I think that can be a liability when you have a big bank of dollars that you're trying to spend, is that you get undeveloped ideas. So I think it's okay to just sort of sit on it for a minute and say, keep working on that. And I know our behavioral health partners are listening. I know Bob Tryansky is listening. And I think this is another reason for talking about BHLC and what's its next iteration. And should there be should there be a working group coming off BHLC that is working on youth and programming? I think they're down the line. We really need to think about youth crisis in this community. And I think that's the next big thing coming at us. And I think that would be a good, but that's for a later date. I see Sarah taking notes and we talk about what's the next thing. But that's there.
Yeah, I like that discussion, and I want the DECA to keep working on that. I think it's possible that if they flesh out a program and get some startup funds from outside, from grant funds or something, that gives us an indication of how we can come along and partner with it after that gets off the ground or has some more knowledge behind it. I do want to see that synergy between DECA and RAPS and our truancy work. And I definitely need to see that program has a method of being available for all Douglas County youth and not just the 4 school districts that were named.
Okay. I will have to say I was a little confused on the Heartland Psych request. And so if you can help.
Legitimately.
Okay.
Is it, my understanding is it's included, but I know the dollar amounts aren't quite matching up. Is that part of what we need to clarify?
Meaning it's included and doesn't need to have a line item here.
Right, we have allocated ongoing $400,000 for psych infrastructure projects. And my understanding is this was affordable inside that, but we asked for 208 and then they asked for 227. Cammy, can you email Liz and see if we can just get some clarity on what the dollar amount is? It's a pretty small discrepancy. But my understanding is I think both pieces were, and that's where maybe don't have, I mean, Brooke, do you have what's in the 400 at this point, or is that?
And I added this line in the worksheet because I saw it in our books and did not see it on here. So that
Okay.
may be part of what's causing some confusion. I just wanted to make sure that it didn't get lost in the shuffle.
Down on a little sticky for me or a piece of
Yeah,
paper?
I was just gonna ask
Right.
where did that line come from? Because I
That would be me.
at the beginning of our hearings, thought that it was a supplemental request, had it in my list at was it the 208 amount? And then when we had our discussion and that hearing day last week, understood from Bob that it was built in, so then didn't have any follow-up questions for Liz. And then didn't see it in, sort of confirmed that belief by not seeing it in the spreadsheet. So sounds like it's included, just not 100% sure what the amount is.
There is capacity in that 400 for this. And that is, I would say that I just want to make sure the commission's comfortable with how we've been making those decisions, because it is unlike how we do other decisions for your budget. But we do convene a committee called the Psychiatric Infrastructure Committee, which includes Dr. Dodson and other psychiatrists, as well as partners from LMH, Burt Nash, Heartland. I think DECA is on that group as well. And they review requests for funding from that pool. That pool of dollars is not permanent. It is intended to front load support for a psychiatrist or APRN, and then go down over time as they build their practice. So that's, and then also with partial years. Let's see, Brooke may have that too to do. Okay. Oh, you think Heartland Radac has money in there?
Oh, sorry, it might be the other Heartland.
I think it's the other Heartland. That's the Heartland. Okay.
You're right.
We will clarify the amount for you, but my understanding is the whole thing is included in the 400.
Okay, so why don't we skip that and we can come back at a later time or date
Yeah,
when we have some better information on that.
Right.
Okay, no, that's fine. It was a
think
line
we-
that was added, so.
Probably should strike that line, so that it doesn't
Yeah.
look like it's something that we didn't fund. It's something we are funding through a different mechanism.
Yeah. Okay. Did we resolve everything, commissioners, on mental health sales tax funds? Okay. Thank you, Anna. All right. So, yeah, I'm just trying, I think maybe senior services is another category, or we call that safety net.
Well, if we're going by the categories we had, so we already talked about economic development, and heritage and land management, but then that leaves health and human services and then the targeted populations. So maybe targeted populations is what's on your
Yeah.
mind.
And then we do have to go back to economic development. Thank you, Sarah. Okay. To open up my book for the categories here.
So it looks like I'm the only one, if we start at CASA, just because it's the first in the list that we haven't talked about yet. I'm the only one who had the additional supervisor, and I think felt compelled to add that in part because it was a portion of an FTE and the rest of it, they had other funding for covering it, but I'm open for discussion.
Sorry, I just spilled 1/8 of my budget book on the floor, so. Can you say that again, Commissioner Willie?
Sure, sorry. The CASA request is $20,000 for about a quarter of an FTE for initial CASA supervisor. So the reason that it interested me was because they already had funding to cover the rest of that position. So it was a smaller ask, but I'm up for conversation.
Yeah, this was another example of the city shorting funding for something, and I just I'm continually worried about the county becoming the backstop for all other governmental agencies to drop funding. And I'm not supportive of funding it.
I can appreciate that.
Yeah. I feel similarly, Commissioner Kelly, and I'm pretty sure, without flipping right back to it right now, that I also felt like they had a pretty substantial fund balance so that it would be possible for them to still achieve that even without our funding, but mostly falls in that category of we're here to hold the bag. So I'm not supportive of it. Though I do want to appreciate that it was a partial request and not a full request for a position. So I do appreciate that approach from our partner.
But it was the full request of the money no longer from the city of Lawrence.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you for that distinction. Good call.
So maybe since we're on targeted populations, I'm just making sure I'm getting all the right ones here. So you'll see in there, I made a slight reduction to Douglas County visiting nurses. This is less than 10% of their overall budget. Douglas County visiting nurses has an unrestricted fund balance of over $10 million. We've talked before about fund balance, and this is one that I will tell you, I've been thinking about for a couple years now, because I really value the organization. And when Sarah talks about, funding equals love, this is there. I have some great relationships with people in that organization, but I'm worried about the county and the impact on our taxpayers on continually funding organizations that have robust fund balances. And this is one of those organizations that does. I have let VNA know about my recommendation here. I just was interested in having a conversation with commissioners about, whether when we think about other asks that we're getting and the needs that are in the community, this seems like a reasonable pullback of some funds based on what I would say is percentages of fund balance that are much higher than Douglas County's.
I'd also, while commissioners, and I hate to interrupt your conversation, but our funding for VNA goes to is their charitable care for hospice. Other than Burt Nash, you don't provide offsets to charitable care for any other organization in this community. I can tell you almost every single one of these agencies has charitable care needs. So it's been an inconsistency I'm concerned about. We have statutory ties to community mental health centers. So obviously that's what, but we've worked hard to realign a lot of our funding for charitable care away from towards specific program asks as opposed to Burt Nash calls it sliding fee scale. I'm gonna call it charitable care. But it's the same. We don't fund in-home services for VNA. It is offsetting their charitable care for hospice.
Yep, thanks for that context, Sarah, and and for your articulation, Commissioner Kelly. I was looking at those numbers last night and wondered if that might have been your math, I suppose. And I'm supportive of that because it definitely stood out to me that their fund balance is quite significant. And I think part of what I have maybe struggled with and why I appreciate these conversations so much is really flagging where there are significant fund balances. And we've just held steady on funding because it's always been that way, or it's been that way for a very long time. And that I do think that there's a responsibility for us to be really analyzing where we start to pull that back and acknowledge that subsidy from us was perhaps necessary and helped at some point, and over time is less necessary and less aligned, arguably not aligned with, the county's goals. But I'm certainly supportive of their organization and appreciate that this is a sort of slow or baby step towards a new conversation with them. So anyway, I'd be supportive of pulling back that funding. I'm curious if you had similar ideas about some of the other partners when we get there.
Yeah, I was trying to stay within categories, but yes. Mhm.
So I appreciate those perspectives. This is one of the larger fund balances in terms of percentage of their total expenses for the year. I also kind of flagged that they give us a balanced budget every year. They keep pretty close to that. So they're not necessarily banking additional funds, which some organizations we have have supplemental requests, and they're have a surplus budget that they've suggested and have, larger than Douglas County base funds. So I'm happy to have that conversation. I'm hoping when you say you've talked with them that that's been kind of over a longer period of time and not just tied with this.
Well, no, it hasn't.
Okay.
But I have brought it up in multiple budget years that it's a concern of mine at their high level of fund balance. So I wasn't direct about it, but I did let them know before I included it here.
And I guess because we fund a program, so this is more of a fee for service kind of thing, but we don't have an agreement with them at this point about that.
This isn't a fee for service.
This is good people money. They're a community partner. They do not have a service agreement. It goes towards offsetting their charitable care. It is not at a dollar amount. And I would say they show us a balanced balanced budget, but you don't get these kind of reserves without having excess.
Well, at some point,
revenues.
yes, it's. I guess my concern is I do very much appreciate hospice and have used that service and found it very valuable. I would like to get information back from VNA about how that program, like how many of our dollars are used for that. I mean, do we have a direct tie? So if we cut this, are we cutting charitable care specifically for hospice, or are we just cutting organizational funds and expecting them to backfill that particular program? So that's the conversation that I haven't had with them, and makes me a little uncomfortable to move on it here, but I'm glad to be having those conversations on this and other organizations.
So a little bit to fund balance, I will say that if you look at 2020, their revenue was 7.8 million and their expenses were 5.7 million. In 2021, their revenue was 7.1 million and their expenses was 5.6 million. So right there is 3.5 million. And so, I mean, to me, a 10% less than that, this is a 7% reduction seems very small considering the fund balances that VNA has. And I too appreciate hospice care and charitable, but I feel like they could take a $20,000 hit on their fund balance and it wouldn't have a major impact.
Can follow that.
I agree. Yep, I think it's reasonable.
All right, looking at other, Cottonwood is in this category as well, and I think we've already talked about that. That's one-time funds.
Yep. Amy, is that what your yellow boxes, are those indicative of one time, or is that coming back to?
Yellow boxes indicate that the money lives somewhere else, but that you've funded for it. So it's those Boca and Wawa holdings.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. Just wanted to make sure I was tracking that right.
There is a green box. I'll have to remember the green box technique next year around JAAA, I believe. Is that right?
Yes, and that was me, and I flagged that. I don't have a concern there. They're in the documents that they gave to us in their budget said that last year's funding was at 65,000. And this says their last year's budget from the county was 145,000. I've checked with Cami and our records are correct. Their records are incorrect. I have two organizations that I flagged that for. JAAA was one of them, and the other is, I believe it was tenants to homeowners. And so those, I just want to make sure that we weren't building in an increase without talking about it. But I think we are just using last year's numbers. They
And I
just
will
need
say
to give
that,
us better data.
I'm so sorry. They had a financial manager changeover, and so that person was largely relying on last year's documentation to fill it out. JAAA has been very good at filling out documentation for us when requested.
So I'm fine with those.
Okay. Also in this category is the Senior Resource Center. Let's talk about that one. There's another green box here.
And that was just flagging that, we'd had a little bit of a discussion with Megan when she was online here about the level of funding that Douglas County gives to Senior Resource Center versus seats on the board and kind of feedback from them. So I didn't fund either of those requests, but I'm hoping that that is a conversation that we continue through the year. I would definitely look at those again once we've had a little bit more discussion about what's the feedback mechanism that the county gets from Senior Resource Center, and other commissioners may be better versed in that than I am.
I appreciate wanting to have the discussion. I continue to want to have the discussion with Senior Resource Center. That we are a significant amount of their budget, over 60%. And y- y- some of the things that they're asking for, I think we really want to be in this in senior services. We've funded Project Lively through JAAA. I would like to see a little bit more coordination in our senior services category, and I think that can happen out of Douglas County Senior Resource Center. It's something I've hinted at the last couple of years, and I think I've sort of decided it's time to start bringing that together and have that conversation. When we look at our supportive housing issues, seniors are a big part of our supportive housing issues. So what role do these organizations play, as well as Lawrence Douglas County well, not health, but housing authority? Sorry, thank you. What role do they play in this senior discussion? Because our community is just getting older, and I think the housing issue is going to continue to mount, as is the mental health issues, as we talked about with the fire department and Project Lively and all those things. So I feel like our team, us as a county, need to take a more active role. And I'm just curious, I don't have a plan here, if Senior Resource Center can help us with that in some way. And that may be them being more aligned as a Douglas County agency. I know I'm hitting that drum more times than Sarah probably likes, but that is something I want to think about. For example, one of the things that they asked for was, and they said was a huge cost to them, was this essentially small transportation agency that they're running for seniors. I know Sarah's going to kill me to say this, but we have fleet services, we have mechanics, we have those things. And I don't know that it's the right decision to make, but I think it's worth investigating and talking through.
I'm certainly not going to be upset with the commission about this conversation. We talked about this a couple of years back, when I worked at Johnson County for 11 years, all of these programs like Senior Resource Center were county departments with staff making capers and a living wage. I fully think that if we are going to invest in these programs to the point of totality that we should absolutely do it, and we should do it right. The problem is that you should guide the direction of the organization. I'm concerned about agencies that want to keep their own, do what they want to do, and not look to the county for direction. And I don't mean to say that they tell us to buzz off, but there is a divide between that than if they were directly running from us. I'm a little worried about folks who want their cake and eat it too. They want to get their fleet and all their service and, at a cheaper rate in theory, but then they want to still do what they want to do. And so I think that's the concern. And so I'm fully, and I think that means their governance and their board structures, and doesn't mean you get rid of a board. Boards can be super powerful and advisory and help assist and guide the work and work for the commission in that sense. So there are options in that place in terms of governance. We need to more, it's a conversation that I think needs to be led by the commission, not by staff.
I'm not looking for the county to take on ownership of additional work in terms of like taking over nonprofits. I think that it's healthy, the model that we have, except that I think if we have a significant amount of county funding in there, then county priorities should be reflected. And so just making sure that those conversations are had. One of the things I struggle with is that budget time is the only concentrated time we have to talk about how we interact with these nonprofits, our partners. How do we build in time the rest of the year to have these conversations so that they're not only happening at budget time, so that by the time budget rolls around, they're asking us for requests that we have kind of already flagged an interest in, perhaps?
You tell me now and we'll talk about it this fall. This is what we do. So to me, a lot of these things naturally, if I had just brought you like, let's have Senior Resource Center come in, you'd look at me like, why are they coming to talk to us, Sarah? So I think sometimes what comes out of budget is it's an impetus to sort of continue these discussions outside of that cycle. It was a little, so we can bring our aging partners, let's just think about like, I think you could have a whole conversation with aging partners. I think you could also have a conversation around organizations that, more of a governance conversation. Those to me are two probably different things.
Yeah, and I think it may be good, Sarah, to have a work session that doesn't include partners. I mean, partners
Right.
are certainly welcome to come to any of our work sessions, but just for us to talk about what our expectation and our hopes are in this sector. I think oftentimes in our work sessions, it becomes a presentation by the organization and we're limited on the amount of time that we have to sort of talk about our direction as a commission, and those get channeled into questions rather than because we're having a presentation. So it may just be carving out some time for us to talk about senior services and then sort of set what next steps are, and then another work session after that.
That's great. Staff can kind of compile some materials for you on our current support and outline and make that presentation to sort of kick off the discussion. Yeah, we can definitely set that up.
One of the things I value among community partners and within the county also is when we use a common language, like talking about the Douglas County Health Plan and the planks of that plan, and it kind of puts us on the same page that we know how and where we're collaborating and have ways to check that. So I think the more organizations that can come under either that kind of framework or something similar, maybe it's with the housing and homelessness plan, like so that we know we're talking about the same values.
I will just add that I am excited about the conversation of, really all organizations where we are such a substantial share of their budget, and what does governance and decision-making look like. And I do think that the Senior Resource Center is it's a good particular example of that. And it aligns in multitude of places with county goals, I think. And I do think that there's some real opportunities there for like efficiencies and how to scale some of those services. I also want to just flag that, this was another organization that asked for a full-time social worker. And just want to flag that those are, it sort of confirms in part the need that we've heard about recently and the lack of capacity across social services to really respond to crises across populations. And so for me, that just, I want us, and I know that a lot of these conversations are happening in the housing and homelessness draft strategic plan, identifying tangibly what resources we are invested in as a county in terms of the like social workers, case managers across those agencies, and really getting a broad view of that and figuring out where the gaps are. And I don't doubt that the Senior Resource Center, might be a gap in that, but what does it look like in the whole landscape of where social workers or case managers funded by the county might be place-based to target populations? I just want to have a larger, that's it for me, another conversation to flag about this particular organization and their requests kind of in conjunction with some of the other requests that we got. There's some themes there.
Definitely have that too.
Yeah, and I agree. Finding out where the best place to house the social workers or caseworkers might be, as opposed to having one in each of the organizations that has asked, so that we have that collaboration. But I do not have a recommendation on that, but I'm glad you flagged it.
The mention of social workers is also how it aligns with Project Lively, and it seems like and I know it's more complex than this, but as a commissioner, you get a broad overview of these things and need to dig deeper. But are we doubling up, or is it the social work needs to happen at the Senior Resource Center, or is it Project Lively, or is it through Nat? I mean, who is doing that work? I think is partially what I'd like to see more coordination in that area for.
It does happen, but we can do a better job of painting that picture for you and
Yeah.
making it simple.
Center for, there's so many Cs here.
Lots of centers.
Yeah, Center for Supportive Communities is one I nudged up just a little bit. I'm not supportive of their full request of 100,000. But I do recognize that this is a new nonprofit. And I looked at some other new nonprofits that we've done in a while. Remember, this was something that used to be done by the University of Kansas. And so as they continue to grow, I can see their costs. I am very concerned, as I had questions at the hearings about the cost per student that they serve is at, but I also recognize that this is a small outfit that's really just starting up, and wanted to see if commissioners had an interest in providing a little bit more funding. I'm not supportive of the full 3 more FTE and 1 more part-time, but a little more funding, and expecting CSC to try to diversify funding a little bit. My numbers show that right now we're 38% of their total budget.
I didn't flag this one for supporting the supplemental request, and partially tagging onto that conversation about cost per student. New nonprofits, there's a lot to take in and a lot to get started with. Adding more positions doesn't necessarily help with that kind of maturing work. I really wanted to see some more data coming back from not the KU years, but the nonprofit years before I added money to it. So I left it flat.
Yeah, I had the same line of thinking, Commissioner Willie, and I have some nervousness about rapid growth in an organization, in a startup organization. So it's a hard balance to strike, because I think that they are seeing that there's more request for and desire for their work than they were necessarily anticipating, and I'm empathetic to that. But yeah, I'm not quite there. I'm not supportive yet. And I appreciate your thoughts, Commissioner Kelly. I guess I'm not sure. I'm convinced that that small amount of the request would have much impact. I also would have to refresh my memory on what they broke down as those costs.
Okay.
I think this one's an opportunity for more synergies also, like reading through their reports. Some of what they're doing sounds like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, that there's, that one-on-one mentoring kind of things. Like, where else is that happening in the community that they could partner with or outsource? I think we're going to hear some great things back from them in a year.
I will note, and I'm just going to think this out loud and see what your reactions are, see what Sarah's reactions are. Something that I flagged as part of this conversation in their narrative. And it's come up in not necessarily other conversations in our budget deliberations, but past conversations with this commission, like what the district court can order people to do, and what orders get made, and when there are payments associated with that, if there is or isn't. And I don't know, maybe we don't have a seat at that table and a role in figuring that out. It's just something I'm thinking about, because it stood out to me as interesting that there seems to be an increased amount of court orders to seek services from this organization, which increases the amount of youth that they're serving without an increase in funding capacity. So that's something that I was stuck on in reading it. So I was just saying those thoughts out loud. I don't know where we go from here with that.
You're absolutely right. And I think some of it is a combination of, last year at this time, we said, let's talk and do more work on truancy. So we brought district court into those conversations. We brought the district attorney's office, because in some cases, they were all engaged, but they kind of in their circle, and school districts were in their circle, and service providers were in their own little circle in the middle, touching all the pieces. And so I think as there was more awareness, there were more orders, but that can lead to more fines, which can lead to other issues. There's also been a lot of learning, I think, happening. So I think we have we've just scratched the surface of how we're going to approach truancy. We've got a lot of work that we still need to do. I want all those partners to continue to come back to you, bring you better data, engage our justice system partners, because this is all upstream work. And the impact of COVID on truancy for young people is dramatic as well. So I think it's hard for us to know at this point what was awareness and what was, are there just more people being seen because of post-COVID issues with truancy? And I appreciate the school district doing a lot of work here to get their kind of consistent application of policies in place, but you're going to continue to hear about truancy.
I'll just affirm as an educator, Commissioner Reed, that what we get from the courts sometimes seems like, wow. For one, sometimes that intervention has already happened and it's been unsuccessful. And other times there's a cost related to it that I'm not sure the courts are considering. So maybe a good thing to have a discussion with at our judges luncheon. Okay. I think we need to come back to economic development, but as I look through, I think we're down to just one or two more groups. One is the Salvation Army and one is just food. What I thought we might do is look at those two and then take a little bit of a break and let Cammie sort of set us where we are on our spreadsheet and then come back to economic development. How does that sound, commissioners? Yep. Okay. So why don't we talk about Salvation Army first, and then we'll come back to just food.
So I did pencil in some funds there, but not the full amount. This was, I think we're the first request for funding for this project. And some of that is still being fleshed out, and their capital campaign has not only not started, but it doesn't have a lot of structure to it yet at all. I didn't mind considering a certain amount for like seed money for that capital campaign, because I think that can help bring in other dollars. I wasn't interested in putting the full amount forward at this time early in the game.
Yeah, I'm going to echo some of the things you just said, and that I think this is I think they are working on a good capital project, but I'm very concerned with sort of the county being the first ask. I'd like to see that they have some donor committed funds already. And I think we did get a communication later on that said they do have some donor committed funds, but that needed to be more clearly articulated publicly. And I want to encourage them to keep going, but this is a huge ask for a brand new community partner who we have some relationship with, but I would not say a strong relationship with, and want more time to them to work with our county staff and be involved in what they're thinking and what services are being provided out at the Salvation Army before I was comfortable funding it.
I would echo those sentiments, Commissioner Kelly, and also just say that I personally I would have been more open to, I might be more open in the future to a request from a partner like this related to some specific services. So I'm not really supportive of the capital project. I think that there are other places to find that money. I'm not comfortable with us being really the first big ask anyway, and especially without much of an established relationship. So I'm not comfortable with any amount for this project at this time.
I would be comfortable with a request next year once we had more information. Are other commissioners comfortable with encouraging them to ask us again next year, or not at all?
No, I mean, they can always ask
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
I don't know, I don't ever want to explicitly discourage somebody, but I'm not supportive of it right now in the context of this year's budget process or where they're at.
We ready to move on? Just food. So, Sarah, if you can remind me a little bit, we increased Just Foods funding by 25,000 2 years ago. Is that correct? And at just the year before, the city had reduced their funding to Just Food by 50,000. And then, so that theme is coming up a lot. And then I also am looking at their total fund balance, and they state that their organization's goal is to have a year's worth of operating funds. The county doesn't have a year's worth of operating funds. And the other thing is, when I did a bit of an analysis of their revenue to expenses in 2020, they had in excess of $2.1 million. In 2021, they had an excess of $1.4 million. And their numbers were a little funky in 2022, but again, in 2023, they had an excess of 147,000. So I just think, again, this is the same theme of, I think we have to start thinking about our funding and are we funding fund balance, and do these organizations, and this one did not ask for a supplemental, very similar to visiting nurses, but I think it starts to send that message to our community partners about, do we just keep giving the same dollar amounts over and over and over again without looking at what the actual need is?
I think you've flagged this one for all the right reasons. I looked at it, thought about this one. I think the picture of food and food funding is going to be pretty different now that a lot of the pandemic funding is going away. And so I was kind of curious to see what happens next year in terms of Just Foods. But I also don't mind. I think this is a fairly painless way to send that message and then have a fuller discussion next year.
Yeah, I appreciate all those things. What stood out for me about this was, I think I just didn't realize before, and I don't understand why the city's funding for it went away. And and just in terms of an emergency services, to me, that's what food bank squarely fits into, emergency services. But that said, I mean, I didn't realize that history of such an increase. You said 10 years ago. Was that right? What we just decided?
I think it was 3 years
Oh,
ago.
3 years ago.
We doubled our funding.
Oh, that I was a part of, and
Yeah, in 2022,
that fact left my brain.
we doubled the funding.
Well, and I think in 2022, I mean, we were hearing significant food insecurity across the community, and that totally made sense to me at the time. I'm not saying we don't have significant food insecurities across the community now, but I don't have the same impression that it was as it was during the pandemic. And this isn't really about that. I mean, and this is a very small decrease. So I think this is more about conversations for us, conversations with community partners who have, sizable funding resources, and yet come to the county every year for the same amount or for increases.
I hear that. I'm a little less inclined towards this one, but if it sounds like both other commissioners are supportive of that for those reasons, it makes sense to me.
I'll just let commissioners know I did communicate with their board president over the weekend, and that we had a good conversation. I have not heard anything back from anybody at Just Food since I shared this with him. So we're going ahead with that. Is that what we just decided?
I heard three. So we put down.
Okay, I think we have covered everything. We still have to make some choices on economic development. Is that what you have, Cami? Sarah?
I have that along with behavioral health partners follow-up, but that's not necessary for the budget.
Okay.
I had just a couple of, before we move off of this topic onto something else. There was a little discussion yesterday about funding mechanism, whether that should be more of a stable request or it should be more of a grant program. And I wanted to weigh in a little bit more. I kind of held back figuring we were going to have a bigger discussion about that at some point. I know there are counties that do all of their outside agencies through a granting program, and it makes for a lot of insecurity amongst nonprofits to not have even a foot in the door and have to start afresh every year. When we had the discussion about only once have we put a staff position in one-time funding, I think it would be a very large change to then all of a sudden put everybody is in one-time funding. And just as someone who works with a lot of nonprofits, I think there is a role for the county in terms of providing some funding stability while still kind of putting partners on notice that we will have deeper questions about their financial health when they come to us for requests, especially supplemental requests, but even what has been considered as base funding. So I think there's a middle ground there, but I'm not pushing for us to scrap what we do and start it as a grant program. I think that would hurt the work in the community that gets done.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Billy, and I similar thoughts that I sat with yesterday afternoon and last night, and even in some conversations with coworkers and colleagues in the nonprofit world. I think there's some middle ground. I think that we're getting there bit by bit, year after year, with really sort of organizing and streamlining our money in terms of those external community organizations and service providers that make more sense. I think we still have more work to do there, but something that I thought of in particular was, I think there's real value to the idea of us being community partners and having sort of regular, pretty reliable, but obviously not guaranteed funding for organizations, but that it's on us to be sure that that's really aligned with the county's focus areas, right? And then I think that there could be room for the possibility of some dollars can be treated more like grants that are sort of special project pilot, less operational, less fee for service based agreements that are, really just more project or kind of startup based dollars. I think that I wonder if there's opportunity for that, but I just want to communicate, for public and community partners listening, that I think that there is value in local governments really, and the counties have the unique position of really doing this because of statutory requirements in many places. And it's just sort of how we're oriented to really support safety net and human service work in our community. So I think we're getting more and more thoughtful about that. And I want community partners to hear from us that for me, there is value in us helping an organization, keep the lights on, so to speak, but still with some specific reasons for why we help that organization keep the lights on, right? Because it aligns, because of specific programs and services that they provide. And supplemental requests maybe are, in my experience, most nonprofits, this is still a grant process to them. It just looks a little different than other grant processes. But in terms of the reporting out about information for most of these, the cyclical annual process of submitting requests and having that funding decided on by us, it is a grant process is what it boils down to for most organizations. It just kind of operates a little differently and is a little less restricted than most grant funders.
I think one of the things that this model allows us to do is to have conversations with our partners throughout the year and ask for feedback. And I think there are more conversations that could be happening with partners, and I would just encourage them to continue to reach out to us about what they're doing with county funding, what they see as the vision for their organization. So the more data, the better.
Really appreciate this conversation. I think it's exciting. I do think it's a blend, and I think we can explore more in the blend as to how this works. I do think this is like a grant process, but I would tell you, I think we're a pretty easy grader on some of the materials. So I am encouraged by these conversations around some due diligence related to their financial health, and it will empower me, and I can play this back on YouTube when in the spring when I meet with community partners and trying to get better application materials for you all that they see that you're paying attention to these kinds of things. I think like this, what we've done with psych infrastructure dollars and the behavioral health sales tax fund is a really interesting model. So where we set, partners know there's money there, and they know that so that they can certainly access it and quickly in the middle of the year as an opportunity comes up to try to get those dollars, but they know they don't get it forever. And so they eventually need to move off that. And what I like about it is that we have a group of very invested stakeholders involved in the decision-making. So Heartland is at the table, Bert Nash is at the table, LMH is at the table, and they have to work it out. Because what used to happen is you get a request for a psychiatrist from Bert Nash, a request from Heartland, and a request from LMH, and a request from somebody else. And then that is in your very smart, educated, but layman's hands in terms of our needs in the community. So I think if we can try to find those types of opportunities, I think what Heritage has done here is kind of exciting in some ways with some of those dollars that maybe we can try to, so as you think of those things, we'll think of those things, and maybe our partners will too. And I think we can just continue to evolve our relationship with partners.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation, and I hope the community understands that sometimes what we need to do is interject a disruptive idea and then try to find a space between, how much tolerance our partners have for that kind of disruption and find that spot. But just suggesting this disruptive idea doesn't mean that we're going to do that. So hang in there with us as we sort of work it out. And Sarah, I think we owe it to you as you work with partners, not to just give you a YouTube clip, but to give you as some very clear guidelines or, general things, because I think some of the things that are coming up with this commission, as was said yesterday, are things that we need to really clearly articulate to our partners going forward, and to get some at least know where some of the commission is and what the past practice for the commission is as we go to 5. One thing just to remind the public about is these 3 commissioners cannot talk to each other outside of this room. And so even sometimes this is not the best place to float ideas. And I will say, but there's no other real place for us to see whether something has some movement or interest among the commission if you can't talk to each other outside of this room. And so that creates a real interesting tension, I think, in this space of trying to disrupt a system that has worked this way for a long time, because you don't know if you're just going to be out there by yourself or if it has some traction. So I just share that as just some thinkings here. It's 10:43. Why don't we take about a 10-minute break? Does that sound okay to everybody? And we'll come back at, let's go to 12 minutes and we'll come back to 10:55. All right, we're back for more deliberations on our budget here. Commissioners, I don't know if it's helpful when Tammy's putting up our spreadsheet. One of the things it shows is where our mill levy is now, and we haven't put to it any of the mill levy reduction funds. Do we want to do that before we have this economic development, or just dive into the economic development discussion?
I have kind of some background thoughts on economic development. If we let Camu work on that on the mill levy part of it, that's okay. So I think about, why does the county invest in economic development and what do we hope to get out of it? And I was trying to pull up a graphic that I've had from the KU Institute for Society and Policy Research that looks at our county and surrounding counties in terms of economic diversity. And it's one of the places where we're really lagging behind some of our neighbors, and it impacts especially in the portion of Lawrence that serves as a bedroom community for other communities that host more jobs than we do. More jobs in industry. Our jobs in Douglas County tend to be focused on government, so county, city, KU, education. We are and nonprofits. So we're really skewed in that direction. And that is part of why it often feels like we're playing catch up in terms of there are things that the community wants that we can't afford. And taxes get to be something that an increasing burden for residents, because residential is really the basis of our a lot of the basis of our tax income, because we're lacking in some of those commercial and industrial spaces. So when I look at economic development from the county, I feel like we have fewer tools than cities do to attract some of those businesses. We've needed some game changers in terms of how do we disrupt how we've always done things and look at really driving jobs and well-paying jobs as part of that whole picture of growing up our community into something that serves us in the way we want to be served, but also that we can afford. So that's why I look at leveraging outside dollars and also the ability to grow jobs. I think some of those game changers, I think Peaslee Tech has been a huge one as a game changer in that space, where we're bringing some job development back into the county. And I think KUIP is the other one that I see. I don't see any other organization that the county has influence over that creates that kind of economic driver that our county's been needing. I think we need others. We need additional ones. In the meantime, this is the one that we have influence over. And that's why those dollars mean a lot to me, in addition to outside funding that they bring in, but really generating new and additional entrepreneurs and well-paying jobs. The other one that we'll talk about, the BIPOC revolving loan fund, which has a new name and I couldn't pick it up right away. I think that is a small but needed aspect for our county too. So have a heart for entrepreneurs and creating jobs that are out in the public sector and not just within, we've already added several positions to government and nonprofits in our work here. So just that's my lens and my framework for the discussion about economic development.
Yeah, I guess I don't disagree with anything that you're saying, but I would encourage us to widen our lens of what is economic development. I don't think that the three organizations you mentioned, KUIP, the Chamber, and Peaslee Tech, are our only attempts at economic development. I believe that having a healthy community is economic development. I believe that having, workers who are well trained, but also are well fed, have good mental health, that is part of our economic development work. So I think there isn't just one. I think there are lots of levers that we can pull and push. I think affordable housing is something that we do, and we do that through our planning services and through our planning decisions. So I just don't agree that these three entities are the only ways that we have to move the economic development needle. I believe that we do bring in lots of high paying jobs through KUIP and very appreciative of that work. I've had questions of KUIP of how many of those people actually live in Douglas County and pay taxes in Douglas County. I have friends who work at KUIP and drive back to Johnson County at the end of the day. And so, I've asked for those numbers. I've asked to understand what the economic impact of KUIP is, and then subtract the tax losses that we have because those buildings are subsidized, not only through our funding, but also through no taxes as well. All the arguments that you just made for economic development are true. I think we also have to overlay the subsidized nature of KUIP and what that means. So I appreciate the information we got today about how many organizations are here in Douglas County. That's not the first time we've asked for that. We've asked for that numerous times. And so I don't think anything that you're saying is incorrect. I'm just saying I think we also need to open up that aperture a little wider.
Yeah, for me, well, I like that last phrase you said, Commissioner Kelly. It really is about wanting to widen the lens and have more. I mean, I agree that there are lots of sort of subtle, non-traditional or non-obvious ways in which we invest in economic development across our community. I think that the county commission has been having more robust conversations and tried to drive, what are the different factors that make for a healthy economy and a diverse economy that helps to start to lift everybody's boats at the same time. So I just think there's more work to be done. And I, just reiterate something I said yesterday that it's not that I don't believe that some collaborative work is happening amongst those partners, but it is not very evident to me. And I think that there are some economic support organizations and partners in the community that are, not necessarily reflected in our budget or not directly linked into those conversations. And I want to hear more. And for KUIP in particular, I feel quite strongly that they do not need a restoration of money from us. And I would argue that they can deal with less money from us because private revenues other revenues in general have increased so much, and the tax subsidy is significant. That is a significant way in which we are supporting the work that they're doing, and there is value there. And I think that the history of our investments in those projects have showed that we have a really high value for the work that they do and what they're contributing to the community. I'm not supportive of giving them more money. I'm interested if, I think we probably are just going to land on leaving them where they are, perhaps since each of us had different ideas of that on their line item. I appreciate the capital dollars separately. I get that it's a particular leverage point, and I can appreciate that. I'm always game for how can some local dollars bring in a multiplying effect of dollars from other places, especially, federal sources. So I think that one makes sense to me. I guess I want to, at what point do we begin to really lower the amount of operational support that we give to an organization whose budget has increased significantly and by all accounts is going to keep multiplying significantly in the coming, the imminent few years in front of us and, the decade and beyond based on some of their projections.
And I'm a big fan of organizations kind of maturing and growing past their need for us. A lot of organizations don't fall in the same buckets, and we deal with them very differently because just different animals. And this being one of them, one of the conversations that I had had on the board there was about the possibility of a future payment in lieu of taxes, that there's still, under that model that I'm thinking, there would still be support from with local dollars that gets leveraged into that state and federal funding, but that in addition, there'd be a way to capture some of that that increase of what's not being paid in taxes, some method of how that comes back to the county. And I think they're very open to that. We got something about that in the letter. And I think that is something that we could pursue a little more deeply, like what triggers that and what would that look like?
Yeah, I think when I was on the board, I heard the same thing. So, you know, that could be there. I think one interpretation of how quickly KUIP's campus fills up as soon as they open a building is that it's the amazing collaboration and the access to the University of Kansas. Another less noble interpretation is it's tax-free property at a commercial rate, and commercial rates are extremely high. So, you know, when we look at here, the number of businesses, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm not going to count Innovation Park West building as being Douglas County property because we pay the taxes on it. So is that correct, Sarah? Okay. So, you know, there's 7 companies that have come out of how many? And, you know, this is great, but for the amount we've invested, I'd like to see a transition into recognizing the additional benefit that is being paid by Douglas County to commercial property that is non-taxed. That's the big tipping point to me, is that in all of the analysis, that's not in there. And so while I'm not proposing we cut their funding, I'm proposing that if they're not going to recognize that benefit, I'm not going to reinstate their funding to not I'm going to do it. and I don't know that 50,000 is the right number. But this is an organization that is continuing to grow, continuing to level they keep getting federal dollars. So that tells me that our 50,000 reduction hasn't impacted their ability to leverage those funds. We are players in this game, significant players in this game. We can go back and look at our BTB support over the years. And when we compare it with the city and the county, we're up to $7.2 million. So it isn't that the county isn't supporting it. It's significant support and significant capital investment support. So I don't disagree with any of the arguments making. I'm just, sometimes I don't want to fund things, not because I disagree with the idea of it, but because I want to send a message that, you know, not recognizing that non-taxable land is a concern for me. All right, so let's see if we can make some decisions, commissioners. We've talked about BTBC and sort of said where we stand on this. I'm fine holding them flat. I did hear Commissioner Reed say maybe we just get to hold them flat.
Yep. I mean, I think that's where we are by the simple math of the 3 of us being in 3 different positions. So.
And then
And we've decided the 225 one time already. Is that in there, Candy? Right. I mean, that's what I remember from discussion yesterday.
Commissioner Willie.
I think that's where we are.
Okay. And then maybe go down to EDC of Douglas County and Lawrence Chamber. I'd like to hear a little bit more, Commissioner Reed, about some of the other ideas that you have and where we would put those dollars. You had mentioned yesterday, like you have some ideas of, you had this 50 and this 55, and you had an idea of how to use that. Is there an organization we're putting it with, or is there something that we're doing? Because we don't have an economic development program here at Douglas County. what does that look like?
Yeah, it was not a fully fleshed out idea yesterday, in terms of, well, it's a pretty open-ended idea. So the total number I came up with between, the suggested cuts for both UIP and the chamber was, $105,000, which was just a number that was, like the revolving, loan fund support, and an amount that I just thought was, a little bit arbitrary. I'll acknowledge the number. My thought about it is, yeah, we don't have a economic development fund to set aside money in for other organizations. I think that there's organizations and individuals who have really taken the lead on some of the strategic doing sessions in since the E3 Forward Cities event that we had back in February. And I guess for me, there's more information to learn. My hope is that if we could possibly set aside some money, and maybe it's just some money from the chamber, to really encourage that the chamber, along with the other players in the economic development field, some of which we fund, others of which are newer. Black 30 is an example. There's also been CORE, which has been around for a couple of years, and doing a lot of economic entrepreneurial support specifically. And I think that I think it's a different type of economic development than what I believe that the chamber traditionally has been focused on. And I think that they are making efforts towards supporting more entrepreneurial startup and support. But to me, the only thing that is really evidenced from them in that is this revolving loan fund. And I think that's one strategy, but I would like to see it in conjunction with other strategies that I think are baking. So I don't feel like I have enough information about those baking ideas to really articulate them. And I wouldn't want to speak for other people who are really leading some of those conversations in the strategic doing committees, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, that had formed and have been meeting and talking regularly about some of those goals, and how do we widen that aperture and the lens at which we are looking at how we value. What does economic development mean, right? I think it means a lot of different things, as we've had discussions about. So I guess maybe it could be set aside money that is still, assigned to the chamber, but that is specific to, I'd just like to see some tangible ideas, projects, programs, initiatives for us to fund, to the point of, I'm not certain what our return on investment is. It's not very clear to me with the money that we give the chamber and EDC, and perhaps setting some money aside and encouraging that they come back to the commission with other economic development partners that they already, I believe, are working with, and speak to that in their narratives to us, and come back with some tangible proposals and ideas of how to infuse some cash into some specific ideas born out of that. Otherwise, I'm a little worried we're going to lose the thread on all of that work and conversation that's been happening as a result of an investment that this county commission made to get that technical assistance from Forward Cities. But I suppose it's also possible that we find other funds elsewhere to set aside for that. But that's sort of my line of thinking. I don't know if that was clear as mud or what.
Maybe not perfectly clear, but I'm going to pull on the thread and say that I sort of like the idea of putting out a priority that we have contingent on restoring some funding. So we could say, you've asked us to restore funding. We have a specific area or priority or program that we want you to fund, and you can have those dollars if that's what you're going to do. And if that's not what you're going to do, I think we can offer it to other organizations. So, for example, if Douglas County Extension said, we'll do that, I think that might be another option there. But I like staying with the economic development partners that we have and being more specific. I was probably too harsh in my comments yesterday saying we're not getting enough bang for the buck. What I probably should have said is I'm not sure where their energies are focused or where the priorities of the Douglas County Commission are. And so this could more sharpen that focus. If that was the case and we were very specific, I would go to that $30,000 level if we're really specific on what we're wanting them to do and what the measures are that they're expecting to come back with. Do we have a funding agreement with EDC Chamber, Sarah?
We have a community partner agreement,
Agreement.
but we don't have a service agreement.
Service agreement.
And do you mean, Commissioner Kelly, so you have 10,000 on your line going up to that 30,000 requests that they made, but as a set aside with some specific direction?
Yeah, we could do a set aside and have time to come back and maybe since you have some ideas of what you'd like, you could meet with those partners and then have them bring to a work session, like this is what we'd like to do for that 30,000 to get up to that renewal of funding. Just an idea.
I'm interested in the direction that things are going in terms of earmarking some funds for something more equitable than what we've had in the past in terms of supporting entrepreneurs. Is that what I'm hearing? Are there other entities? Black 30 we've heard of. I was kind of surprised we didn't have some more requests that came out of Forward Cities in that strategic doing session. Are those voices still at the table, and do we need to earmark money that could be accessible to a variety of organizations, or is this specific? This is the partner we've worked with in terms of the chamber, wanting to see them engaging those other partners, which might be pretty impactful.
See, Jill has joined us, so she might have some context to offer.
Yeah, I can share that those strategic doing groups have kept meeting. And we actually have our next meeting just kind of with an idea to, we have a meeting at noon today that'll be facilitated by Forward Cities, just talking about how to recognize there's some capacity issues amongst those strategic doing groups. There's still a strong will to stay committed to those goals, but there's a lack of capacity in organizations that are able to execute the work. That being said, with one or two of the areas, well, all three areas, I'll just say, we've got a lot of interest on the part of the Douglas County Food Systems Planner position to be a part of the multilingual resource development. And I've had ongoing conversations with her and with Kim Kreiner Ritchie about how we can operationalize that, because it's very consistent with food policy's goals. On the Indigenous leadership, there's been a series of conversations that have been a little slow going, but they're promising with Haskell Indian Nations, and we're hoping to expand that. And then on entrepreneur storytelling, we've got some really great leadership from a community volunteer and Black-owned business owner that's been consistently leading a work group on a monthly basis to try to facilitate how do we move this needle forward. So it's slow going, but there's effort. There are meetings happening on a regular basis.
And I would just add, Commissioner Willie, I think Black 30 and core, members from both of those groups have been pretty heavily involved, both very participatory in the whole event and heavily involved since. And I think that Small Business Development Center has shown quite a bit of leadership in their small but mighty team in those spaces. And so I think I'm just interested to sort of challenge that the chamber, along with those partners, really come to us with some tangible and truly collaborative ideas of what some funds could do to infuse money into a new idea or a new space and expand that view again of what we value as what economic development is. And a lot of what we talked about was significant value for supporting small business owners of all sizes, right? That there's value in the sole proprietors that can make their life and make their living here and in this community and be supported in that, in addition to those who bring more jobs and a tax base to our community. So I'm just interested to hear more about that. And to Jill's point, it has been kind of slow going. And I think that the timing just didn't really allow for any fully formulated ideas to come to us in this budget season. So I think it's just kind of the nature of the timeline to some degree. But I mean, specifically because the chamber has, made comments throughout their budget narrative and their follow-up email to us about how much they value collaboration. I kind of want to challenge that. I'd like to see that more obviously in a proposal that was born out of something that the county invested money in to expand and sort of change and evolve the conversation about what is the spectrum of economic development and what is the role. I think that there's a tendency to stay in a familiar traditional place of how chambers function. And I would like to push on that a little bit.
I would just say, I want to reemphasize the EDC as being the county's economic development wing, right? And that this is something I've been pushing for a little bit now, of that organization should house some of the smaller organizations that you have. And one thing we could do is that we could put 30,000 into our commissioner's budget and ask our leadership at the chamber who works with who is the EDC, right? They aren't the EDC, but they are the management, to bring us back a plan that shows collaboration with multiple entities and shifts up their organization a little bit to engage that group. It becomes more collaborative. So it's around entrepreneurship. It's thinking about all the different agencies that you're talking about and maybe integrate some of the things from these strategic doing sessions. I haven't been part of those. And that's what we hold and say, like, if you want this 30,000, we need to see a bit of a redesign of how we're doing EDC. It's something I've been asking for. They've made some changes. They've changed their goals, but maybe we need a financial lever here to pull as well. That's just an idea.
And I think it's an exciting one. And I think that maybe holds the door open for a space for some of these new paradigms around entrepreneurship. They're not new, they just haven't had the attention they deserve. So I think the 30,000 to the commissioner's budget to hold for Chamber, EDC, Small Business Development Center, kind of that collaboration and other partners that they can bring forward to be creative and to bring us something that's exciting and kind of tracks along with those community conversations that are ongoing from Forward Cities.
Commissioner Reed, how do you feel about that?
I'm good with that. Also, just flag while we're in that topic of chambers, and thank you for the distinction about EDC. I think those waters are a little muddy for me. But it's up to us to keep kind of defining and being intentional about that, I think. Maybe it's a topic for this fall for us. I'm just curious about chambers countywide. So we had a request for flat from Baldwin. Very small request, has been that forever. And yet, like, I would argue that their list of what they do and what they support is pretty significant and substantial. Eudora hasn't, this is the second year, right, that we didn't get a request from Eudora, and I don't really believe that they're a staff chamber anymore. And I think maybe, I guess what I'm getting at is those two chambers also, I think, are pretty historically have been pretty intrinsically involved with their municipalities. There's been a lot of changing landscape in recent years. I guess it just makes me feel like there's maybe some space for us to have a larger conversation about where all of those energies and investments are, because it has just struck me year after year, the disparate amounts of funding between the chambers in particular. And whether or not that is quite representative of the work and the impact. So I guess I just put that out there for, I don't know if later in the fall, just sort of a larger, broader economic development conversation around who all those partners are. The other chambers, I don't want to, well, the one other chamber that's still functioning anyway, don't want to leave them out of that conversation, even though I know they've been a small request from us. We didn't hear from them last week.
The Baldwin Chamber actually is a pretty exciting part of the community and a lot of community change there. I'm excited that we give them at least a small token to kind of keep that work going. Be glad to look at other amounts in the future. I, in my mind, tied that the Baldwin Chamber request with the historical partners requests, in that Baldwin doesn't have a museum, so we don't fund something that goes into, which I think museums are also economic development for places. We give $14,000 to the museum in Eudora, and then the city provides the additional part from that, but Baldwin doesn't get something similar. Lecompton does well by that, but so I tied those together, that Baldwin isn't getting.
Blackjack is yeah, pretty
not-
close to Baldwin.
It is, 5 miles. So, so
Okay.
pretty close in country terms, but that's not something that necessarily has the same kind of economic driver. So I think the 10,000 is still fairly low. I
I've
think the
never
Eudora
tied those
conversation.
two together,
Well,
economic development
but I
and
do understand.
historical.
I understand where you're going there.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a stretch for me, but I understand where you're going. But I think this is something we could ask EDC to take on. So for example, when we get a report at EDC from Eudora, it comes from the Eudora City Manager's office. It doesn't come from the Eudora Chamber.
And in
From
Baldwin,
Baldwin, it comes from Dave Hill, right? Who isn't the, and he's on the board, but how we connect those. I have a question about Lecompton, and maybe more to your point. I think the biggest economic driver for Lecompton is their historical resource, right? And yet the city puts nothing towards that. And I sort of said that jokingly the other day, but I'm not entirely joking. I think those are some of the things when we talk about what EDC should be doing and should be working on, is how across the county are we reducing barriers to entrepreneurship? How across the county are we diversifying our resources from KUIP? If KUIP is our energizer, that's not the word. What do they always use? Incubator, right? How are we seeing that across the county? Where are we identifying properties in Douglas County that those businesses could go to? We could make some choices around neighborhood revitalization or things like that to make it, if taxes are the issue, we could address that within EDC and talk through that. Those are some of the ideas that I think we need to change the conversation at EDC about. And I'm really excited about this idea of using some dollars that they definitely need. They've asked for multiple years to have these dollars reinstated to drive that. It's not something new. It's just a different direction that we're asking them for. So to your point, Commissioner Willie, let's get Lecompton involved, because we give a significant amount of money to their historical societies. Is that their version of the chamber? I think that's what you're asking, right? And if Eudora's is struggling, how can the EDC help Eudora to build a chamber locally there for them and their municipality that may be funded by the city of Eudora? Eudora's going to need one with Panasonic coming. And I think that would be a good conversation to have.
And recognizing that not every community is going to have the same model for what a chamber might look like, or even that those functions fall under Chamber of Commerce. In addition to that conversation, I still am in favor of putting some county dollars into the establishment of the revolving loan fund. I see other commissioners didn't put that in. For me, that is a one-time cost.
Yeah, I just need to hear more about this. I need it to be a little more developed. I visited with a chamber board member last night, a very short meeting. And I think they agreed. I want to know how many groups they're funding. I like the idea. Are you suggesting that we hold money, one-time money, and have them come back? Or are you just hoping that you can convince two commissioners to do a one-time 105?
I was just flagging that that is of interest to me. If the information needs to come first, that's fine. But I didn't have the same level of discomfort is all.
Yeah, I just want to see it in action first, and I will also reiterate something maybe I didn't fully articulate yesterday. I said that I was disappointed, but I just want to put a point on that. When I look at the amount of investment from the Chamber EDC's Rising Together campaign, which was significant and keeps being touted as their biggest, capital campaign to date. And that's great and wonderful. And I would expect something a little closer to the amount of money that they are asking of public money. It's a value statement to me. And if they are only saying that they only value $30,000 worth of investment in an idea that they are trying to sell everybody else on more than 100,000 of, that's not math that I feel good about. So I'm just not supportive of it yet. I think that they should put more money into it if it's a idea that they have a strong value around. I think that they could show that more with some of their own funding. And I would just like to see, it in action before I'm comfortable with us putting any money in it.
Commissioner Reed, would that translate into possibly offering those funds as matching?
Yeah,
Like
that's right.
that the county will match what is put in from private dollars? I think there was a second ask they were going to go back to the community for. I think we'd have to cap what that top dollar was, but is that a possibility?
Yes, I could be open to that.
Yeah, so what if we need to use the commissioner budget, but that is our prerogative. What if we put 105 into the commissioner budget and can be used to match private funds? So if they have 30,000 in private funds, we would match 30,000. If they get up to 50,000, we could match that 50,000. I think for me, I'd like to see that three-legged stool of private, city, and county money. And, in my head, I would even move the number up above. I know they asked for 105, but I thought, maybe they said 500 million. Scratch that. Don't record that, Matt. They asked for 500,000, right? And so I was thinking in my head, like, what would be equal contributions from all three of those areas to get it to that 500,000 level. It's all one-time money, and I think it reinforces for me, if there's trust from private donors that this fund will work, I have more trust as a commissioner that this is something that we should put our dollars behind as well.
I would maybe hold back from trying to be a third of that. I think what was requested was about a fifth, and I was comfortable with that because I think there are private dollars to be had for this.
Yeah, I'm 105 is my top. So if we are going to structure it as we'll match up to 105 in private dollars raised, I guess I want to be clear about, they had listed a few like foundations that they were exploring or waiting on answers from. The line that I'm interested in specifically is the private dollars that they raised locally, capital dollars. And that I did the math and I didn't write myself a note of it, or it's on my computer, I think, but that's like roughly 1% of an investment of what they raised. And I know that they are raising those funds for a whole lot of things. It's such a small amount and I can't understand it. And that's a conversation for me to keep, we'll circle back with those partners and see if I can grasp an understanding, but I just want to communicate very clearly that that feels like a value statement to me and that it's not of high value to them, only that it helps them leverage some more public dollars. And so I'm okay with matching in a way, as a way to encourage that more private dollars get infused into this if it is of high value to them.
We're on to something with this matching. I think we're all agreeing that what if, to Commissioner Willie's point, we matched it at 2-1? So if they're private, that keeps it so it's not 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, right? So if we would put aside 100, I'm just going to use 100 because it's easy instead of 105, right? And we said for every $100 they put in, we would put in 50, right? So that's our percentage there. It would get them to 500 relatively quickly. If they have 100 from the city, they have 100 from us, and they have 200, they're getting pretty close there. That's, a way that we can make sure that you're seeing the Commissioner Reed's private is there. And that we're getting that percentage balance that you're talking about.
And my concern with the third was that you had a third is the city, the third is the county, and the third private. Yeah, this is too much for me and I think private foundations will fill a part of that. I kind of like Commissioner Reed's suggestion is that, private dollars will be matched 1-for-1, not foundations, but private people dollars.
I'm fine with that. So let's do the 105 match 1-1 to private dollars. Is that where we are?
Private chamber support.
Sure.
That's the
Yeah.
same thing. So if the chamber allocates funds to it from their resources, or you just want them, like, they have to demonstrate to us that they've raised it privately
I think that value statement still works when it's chamber dollars for me, but
from their capital campaign. That's what.
I just want to make sure it's not the dollars that we put in.
Agreed. Okay, so if it's from their capital campaign, chamber capital.
That's what I was just
campaign,
gonna say. To me, that's the important, like,
because we did not contribute to their
that is
capital.
a tiny slice of the pie.
So 105 in the commissioner's budget for that,
Yeah. And it's a one-time,
one time.
Yes.
Okay.
Got it.
well, that was simple as pie. Okay. So now we've done that whole gesticulation. Do we want to go? I want to give Commissioner Willie one more shot at KU Innovation Park. Is there anything creative you want to do there?
well, I do love dollars that support entrepreneurs and
Mhm.
the county dollars, the particular ongoing funds that we're talking about are part of that business support. I think having multiple ways that we get at that same, having different doors that people can come in through different levels of business. Whenever we've got small business development center, some money set aside for something new and creative, and then the money that goes to KUIP for small business development. I think all of those are really valuable to me. I have a hard time kind of picking and choosing among them. So I said it's a value for me, but we've heard from others also, the other commissioners.
I'm just interested if there's any, and maybe this is just a conversation we need to have with KUIP. Is there any way that we can incentivize companies for leaving KUIP and going out into Douglas County? Is that, and I don't have an answer to that. That may be something.
Here's a
Yeah.
piece. Not all of the businesses that receive business development support are physically located in KUIP. So like, for example, if my business had still been up and running, we could have accessed that as a resource. County dollars would have helped cover that cost, but we would have still been on the tax rolls. So maybe that's kind of where you're getting at, is knowing how many of those dollars go towards, internal supports of businesses that happen within KUIP campus and those that happen offsite.
Yeah, I don't have a real. I just want to explore it more with our KUIP partners, and maybe that is your role on that board of how we can recognize the dollars that are the real estate tax value dollars that are held there. And it has for me, and I think it's important to say, like, they say, well, the city and the county have equal shares in this, but if you add in the taxes, it's not equal shares, because the county has a significantly more of property tax value there than the city does. So I think when we're putting all of the benefits on the table, that's the benefits we're not including right now. And so if there's an opportunity, if taxes are the thing that we think are attracting businesses, then is there a way to incentivize them to stay in Douglas County? Maybe in a different way than at KUIP and open up space. I don't know.
Frankly, I think that's a conversation that the EDC should be having also with us, with the EDC and with KUIP, that we as a community need to be providing those businesses, those physical spaces and commercial properties for businesses to grow out of KUIP and then have a place in the community. So I think that's the reason we don't have all of them staying here, and some are with the Med Center and stay with the Med Center. That's another piece of it. But in terms of companies that are graduating and keeping them in Douglas County, making sure that they have a space to graduate to is a conversation that I think should be had with the EDC and us. I think there's work to be done there because there's a lot to capture with that process with those graduating companies. And I don't know that we have had a concerted effort to do that.
Okay. Fund balance and mill levy. That's next, right, commissioners?
I did want to provide some clarifying on the Heartland request, and Pam is here to talk if you want to ask some questions about the JDC position. So from where I'm at right now, Heartland Health Center asked for more funds for the psych position than what they were allocated in 2023 and more than what we have available in that 400,000. So what we have built in is the 121,500, and that is what their support for 2023 is. Their larger dollar amount on here, commissioners, reflects they would like more than that, but that's not the recommended amount of what is built in is the 121,500. And that is inside the $400,000 allocated. So if you wanted to go above that, you would need to go above. It's not built in, is what I would say. Does that help?
Well, but why would we do that to Heartland rather than the psych?
I'm not recommending it.
Okay.
I'm just telling you where you're at.
Yeah, I'm not going to recommend that because I think it goes outside of the process that we've established and I've already said today. Maybe something to look to going forward of putting certain dollars to psychiatric care and then having this board sort of determine the best way of doing that.
Yeah, and over the last several years, like that number has changed over time. Sometimes it's had more, sometimes it's had less. For a long time, we had more dollars in it and they weren't being used, so we allocated them to other things. I would say that is the nature of it, trying to attract psychiatry to this community. It's feast or famine.
So the supplemental request that we actually have is the additional 86,500 that would be between the 208 that was in our packet and the 121,500 that was already set aside. Okay.
Yes.
And this is all in the mental health tax fund, which is, we don't need to distribute. I mean, we can wait on that, right? So is this because they
you
have
can-
someone who is on staff?
Well, what I would just say is, I mean, do you want them to come back and bring you more information, or are you just good with it? I mean, if
Yeah.
you don't have to, I mean, I would like to make these decisions in
Okay.
budget as much as possible. Obviously, they can ask in a future year or again, to me, if we're extending because we want to set something up or we want to do something different, we can. I don't know what more information I can give you on this request.
For this one, I mean, I'm not supportive of it because it goes outside of that process that we was just mentioned and we've spent some time talking about. And I think that their fund balance is plenty healthy. And so it's a cost that can be absorbed. And I would prefer, I do think that the process for that psychiatric infrastructure was pretty intentionally put together. And I think that it's working well. I think that it has some good accountability and checks and balances in it. So I kind of just want to respect that process and leave it where it's at with the one.
I'm comfortable with what's built in.
You want to come up and kind of, so Pam.
Sarah, I just want to make sure we watch our time because
Yeah,
I do
about
have a
15
hard stop
minutes.
at
Will you
12.
stand at the podium?
Commissioners, do we want to hear from Pam and then look at where our mill levy sits now and maybe not meet tomorrow? Or do we want to hear from Pam and then come back tomorrow to sort of clean everything up?
I assume we were coming back tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm just checking to make sure. I just don't want to dive into something too late here, but Pam's here. Yeah.
I would like to look at things kind of holistically once we've got a picture there and see if anything needs to be tweaked.
Okay, so we'll hear Pam here and then we'll probably hold and then come back tomorrow to sort of clean things up. Okay.
Good morning. I don't know how much clarity I can provide, but I'll explain kind of the history of what's happened. So we've always had a person assigned to youth services from the RAP program. And that position's always been part-time. And in the last few years, we always shared the position with Bishop Seabury. And the RAP worker did groups and met with kids individually who requested it. And then they're a big part of our transition plan for kids from day school back to public school. So our goal is to attach kids to a RAP worker at their home school, and they check in with that RAP worker during the transition period so that they have somebody to help problem solve through any issues that they're having in that transition. Then last June, we were notified by Burt Nash that we were going to no longer have a RAP worker assigned to us, which was surprising to me, which I talked with Sarah about. We have traditionally paid $21,000 in our prevention grants from the Department of Corrections for RAP programming. The $21,000 they've always attached to Liberty Memorial School. For whatever reason, I didn't really care how they applied it because we had a RAP worker, so why would I care? Then subsequently they said, well, we're not going to do that anymore. I said, well, I know at the school year, when we were talking about the budget this year for the KDOC funds, there was conversation at the school district about making Liberty more of a
focus school. Mhm.
Yeah. And so I had conversation with Burt Nash and I said, with the change, do we want to refocus the $21,000 towards RAP at youth services? And the way I read it is that they applied for it to be applied to youth services. So I really thought we were done. And then in the budget hearing, they talked about having a full-time position, which we've never had. I'm not arguing that we couldn't benefit from it, but it seems a little bit much. So I'm not exactly sure what they're doing in terms of the funding.
And I
I'm a
think
little
it's
confused.
partially just in the complexity of Burt Nash's budget. We've said several times to them, we think this is just a part-time position. And it just didn't get updated again. And we can try to follow up with Burt Nash on that.
And
But
just
I
a little more clarity about
Right.
counseling. We also pay for intervention from intervention grants for counseling currently because we have this gap that we have to fill. Like, how do we make sure that the kids who I think are highest needs in the community receive services from counselors? And so we pay from intervention funds for a private contractor to come in and provide one-on-one counseling to kids who request it. And I don't think they currently do groups, but we have them come in about once a week and just visit with kids and kind of see where they're at and trying to alleviate any issues before they become big. And so hopefully with RAP coming back to us, we thought we could eliminate doing that and could focus that money on kids who are underinsured or uninsured.
So that 21,000 is not necessarily available.
21,000 is prevention. I was talking about intervention. I was just
Okay.
telling you what we're doing in the stopgap.
And you're going to need that even if you have the part-time RAP position.
Well, we'll use those services for kids who are uninsured. So if a family needs counseling or they need some kind of service, we'll use intervention dollars. It's separate. I was just kind of letting you know what we've been doing since it stopped in
Okay.
June.
But I just want to make it clear that those funds aren't available to
The prevention money
offset.
is, the prevention money, the 21,000, it's already allocated to Burt Nash for RAP.
Okay, so all right, and that is not your intervention funds. I guess I'm confused. 'cause
No,
both are around
intervention money is a separate
20,000.
fund, and we always have a allotted amount for uninsured and underinsured kids. And we pay for things like battery intervention or sex offender treatment or whatever we need to pay for.
Well, half of this position is 36. So if you got 21 and 30.
Well, 21,000's already been allocated to Burt Nash, and my understanding it was for youth services. So I'm not, we give that money to Bert Nash to provide service for
Right.
RAP.
So it sounds like maybe we've solved our own problem. We will work that piece out on RAP and that money and then any difference we'll figure out because your budget's in the general fund. So let's just take it off the table and Pam make a note that we need to follow up with Bert Nash on it
Okay,
and we'll figure out how to make that work.
thank you.
Sorry about that, commissioners. Pam, can you kind of get me an email with all that
Yes.
and I'll send it on?
So I guess we're not making a decision on that now.
Yep, I
We're-
don't think-
We're good.
I think
Okay,
I'm pulling it off the table because I think I can figure it out without you.
okay.
The difference between 30.
Okay, commissioners, is there anything else that we need to look at here?
So I'm curious about the mill levy impact, because I think we were taking away the 4 point something million that was in the commissioner's budget, replacing it with a smaller number, and then the things that we put here. So
But that's not. They need some base budget to pay for. So. What number? I'm in comparison to the 2023 budget. So. If you.
Yeah,
But that's not, it's not 3.9.
so here's what I would suggest. We take and then we come back tomorrow morning. Yeah, yeah, how about we just do that? Mhm.
I'd also like to confirm all of the one-time award changes and
Yeah.
what that's done to the fund balance for you.
We'll do.
That sounds good. Anything else, commissioners? Staff? Thank you for being here. Thanks for spending all the time. Thank you for those of you who listened online. We'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock.